It isn't very often that one gets to review one of the most unique and fascinating watches ever created. A watch designed by the biggest celebrity in the world for the first half of the 20th century. A man first hailed as an American hero, then investigated as a Nazi spy. This is the flight watch of Charles Augustus Lindbergh. And this is the story of his watch, and what do all these crazy markings mean anyway? That coming up next. Just after World War I, people were, even more so than now, captivated by airplanes. Flying was all the rage. There was the new U.S. Postal Air Service, whose pilots delivered mail no matter what the weather, resulting in an extraordinarily high level of crashes. There were flying races in the flying circus, air shows where people could pay big bucks, $3 to $5 at the time, to take a ride in a real aeroplane. In addition to rides, the pilots also did aerial acrobatic shows where they would fly upside down, dance on wings, and do aerial loops to stun the crowds. By the age of 25, pilot Charles Lindbergh had already done all of these things. In 1919, a New York hotel owner named Raymond Orteig offered a $25,000 prize for the first person who could fly non-stop between New York and Paris. Orteig was friends with the pilots who frequented his hotel, and the idea for the prize came from World War I flying ace Eddie Richenbacker, who said he was looking forward to the day when the two Allied countries could be linked by air. At the time, the only way to travel from New York to Europe was to travel by ocean liner, a 5 to 6 day trip if weather cooperated. However, the Orteig Prize was still unclaimed 8 years after its announcement, and several people had crashed and died trying. Charles Lindbergh, in an airplane he specially designed for the task, took off on May 20th, 1927, his plane so heavily loaded with fuel that he could barely get off the ground. The following day, when English boats spotted him still alive, the telegraph news services went wild. By the time Lindbergh arrived in Paris on the night of May 21st, after sitting in his wicket seat for 33.5 hours after he began, more than 100,000 people were there to greet him. Lindbergh's flight showed the whole world that a new era of fast and exciting air transportation was possible. In the following months, Lindbergh traveled all around the globe, greeted by foreign dignitaries and massive crowds. During his tour of the USA, 1/4 of the entire US population came out to see him in person. Now, I'd be remiss if I glossed over the fact that Charles Lindbergh's life beyond this pivotal moment wasn't roses and glory. It was complicated. In 1932, 5 years after his famous flight, the Lindbergh's baby, Charles Jr., was kidnapped for ransom and later discovered dead in a shocking incident that was the biggest news story of the decade, eventually solved by the FBI.
On September 18, 1934, a $10 gold certificate spent at a gas station was turned over to the FBI, and this man was convicted for the murder of the Lindbergh baby.
In 1939, Lindbergh himself was investigated by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI as a Nazi sympathizer and possible spy. File number 6511449. Lindbergh had been sent to Germany by the US government to gather intelligence, which he did and well, but he'd also seemingly become enamored by Nazi philosophy and firepower during his visits there. He even accepted a medal and a presentation sword from Hermann Goering, which infuriated many people back in the USA, even though he couldn't possibly have reasonably refused. When World War II began, Lindbergh did rallies as a potential US presidential candidate supported by the America First Committee, who argued that the United States should just stay out of the war because it doesn't matter who wins. And he kept this stance no matter how bad the news of Hitler's behavior got. Every time Lindbergh gave a speech or wrote an article, the FBI received letters from concerned citizens asking, "Have you seen this?" But after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Lindbergh joined the war effort as a test pilot and helped Henry Ford improve famous planes like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the Corsair. Then, he became a hero pilot a second time around, this time in the Pacific, teaching young pilots how to fly in a way that preserves fuel and flying over 50 rescue and combat missions himself. After the war, Lindbergh traveled frequently and found time to be a father for 13 children by 4 different women, with whom he had relationships simultaneously, a fact that didn't come out until after his death. He was reinstated in the military as a brigadier general by Dwight Eisenhower, signed autographs for the astronauts of Apollo 18 with President Johnson attending, and on September 8, 1954, J. Edgar Hoover himself, the man who had investigated Lindbergh as a Nazi spy, sent a letter to Lindbergh offering his condolences on the passing of his mother. As J. Edgar Hoover noted, absolutely no evidence of Lindbergh's betrayal of American interests had ever been found. In Lindbergh's final years, seemingly disillusioned with technological advancement and modern life, he became a supporter of indigenous people and cultures, including the natives of Africa, the Philippines, and Brazil. He fought for the protection of endangered animals like eagles and whales, and he even created a rainforest preserve. Like I said, complicated. But when the Lindbergh Hour Angle Watch came out in 1931, none of those things had happened yet. Charles Lindbergh was pure, unadulterated hero. The Hour Angle Watch is based on an earlier design by Captain Philip Van Horn Weems, a military navigation specialist, shown here between Lindbergh and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who is also a pilot. Lindbergh and Weems worked together to develop a new watch that could quickly and accurately determine longitude. That is, your exact position east to west, based on your location compared to Greenwich, England. The Hour Angle, then known as the Lindbergh Weems Navigation Watch, was released in 1931 in a large size of 47.5 millimeters, the same as this watch. It was immediately popular with wealthy people who could afford one, even if they didn't sail, even if they didn't fly, even if they'd never even been in an airplane. As the Smithsonian Institute put it, Longines Wittnauer, the American partner to the Swiss Longines Company, found that the combination of the public's fascination with aviation and Charles Lindbergh's celebrity an excellent combination for selling watches. They added, the actual demand for navigation watches was relatively low in the mid-1930s, but their appeal as artifacts of the air age made them irresistible to some wealthy individuals who could afford them. So let's take a look at this amazing watch. This watch is 47.5 millimeters width, the same as the original Lindbergh model. It's 16.3 millimeters thick, and it weighs a very hefty 126 grams. The crown on the watch is a large Turkish-style crown, and it's large because it had to be manipulated by a pilot while wearing flight gloves. There was no heat, no pressurized cabins in airplanes in those days, so flying at altitude was cold. Although this is a large watch, in the early 1930s, a lot of men were still wearing converted pocket watches as wristwatches, just a pocket watch put in a leather strap, so a large watch was still quite common and this size would have been familiar to many people. The outer dial on this watch is a gorgeous polished white lacquer with painted numerals, with a rotating silvered inner dial, and a bidirectional stainless steel bezel with sunken painted numerals. So even if the bezel gets scratched, you'll still be able to see the numerals with perfect legibility. The hands are blued steel. These aren't painted. In case you're unfamiliar with this, the hands are heat treated in a bed of brass shavings until they turn blue. The steel starts off as a red color, and then purple, and then blue, and if you overdo it, it turns straw color or brown. So you have to get it to the exact correct temperature. The blue color looks beautiful, but it also is the perfect strength of steel, a combination of brittleness and toughness and flexibility that turns out perfectly with that blue color. The crystal of this watch is sapphire crystal, front and back, with several layers of anti-reflective coating on the underside, and I can tell you it really makes a difference. In bright light, reflective light, window reflections, it's still very legible on almost every angle, and it looks great. It's actually one of the best I've seen for anti-reflective coating. The strap on this watch is really great. It's a calf leather lower with an alligator leather upper and Longines hardware for the buckle. It's well finished, excellent stitching, consistent grain throughout, and the thing I like best is it's the perfect stiffness. It's thick and it's cushioned, yet it's flexible enough to wrap around the wrist perfectly and be nice and supple. Now let me show you my favorite part about this whole watch, the Hunter case back. On the back of the case you'll see EF Company, which stands for Ernest Francion, head of the Longines Company in the mid-1800s. Francion was an economist by trade, and he took the what was then boutique artisanal shop of Longines and made it into a production watchmaker, which is probably why it still survives today. Beneath that is the Longines winged hourglass logo, one of the world's oldest trademarks. And if I click this button here, you can see that when I open the case back, it's like a pocket watch case back, and it reveals the movement behind sapphire glass. And on the case back are the engravings. So Longines Hour Angle Watch, number 3374, designed by Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh in automatic version. The original version of this watch was a wind-up. This one is automatic. Stainless steel, waterproof, Swiss made. And I have the serial number covered up there. The movement itself is a beautiful movement, the Longines L699-2, which is a pocket watch size movement, modified base caliber ETA A07L01. When this movement was first introduced at Baselworld in 2004, ETA President Meyer liked it so much he said this movement has a soul. It's a self-winding 28,800 vibrations per hour with 46-hour power reserve and hacking seconds. In the screen here, I've got the balance wheel. When I first saw this movement, I was a bit surprised that it has a small balance wheel because I was expecting a large pocket watch-sized balance wheel, but of course this is a modern movement at modern speed. And as you can see, it has absolutely beautiful perlage all around the whole movement, Geneva stripes on the rotor along with the Longines name and the movement number. The other thing is it's very silent. Because of the sapphire crystal and with the case back on top even more, and the thick glass on the front, it's very silent. You have to put your ear right up to this movement to even hear it. So if you like silent movements, this thing is fantastic. So what do all these markings on the hour angle watch mean? Well, here's where you get to sharpen your brain a little. It's fascinating. However, if you don't like to get technical, you can skip this part. You probably haven't thought about this, but each hour on a watch, any watch, measures a 15-degree rotation of the Earth. The world moves a half turn of 180 degrees every 12 hours and a complete turn of 360 degrees every 24 hours. On the hour angle watch, each hour shows both the time, for example 3 p.m., and a degree reading, 45 degrees. From noon to 3 p.m., the Earth has rotated 45 degrees, about the distance from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., which is why there's a 3-hour time difference between those two cities. One complete rotation of the hour hand measures a 180-degree rotation of the Earth, as shown on the dial. You'll also notice that the bezel doesn't have the usual 5-minute markings, but instead measures 4-minute intervals with quarter sections. Every 4 minutes that passes equals a 1-degree turn of the Earth, or 15 degrees per hour, also shown on the main dial, 15 degrees per hour. The same 4-minute for 1-degree markings are shown in red on the inner dial, so you can read it from either the inside or the outside. While wearing this watch, you get a unique perspective on the passage of time. You get the regular view of time as 60 minutes per hour, 24 hours per day, but you also get the inspired and somewhat ancient view of the passage of time as the movement of the Earth itself. I don't know about you, but I find something about this immensely satisfying. The rotating dial, which was also used on the Weems watch, was used in the 1930s to set the watch to the exact second. Hacking movements, that is, watches whose second hands can be stopped to set the time to the exact second, apparently didn't exist for wristwatches in the early 1930s. So this inner dial was developed so that you could listen to the exact time from a radio broadcast, and then move the inner dial to the exact second, and from then on read the seconds off the inner dial. This new version of the hour angle has a modern movement with hacking seconds, so this function is no longer required. However, there is another use for the inner black dial, still useful for the present day, which is to align the inner dial's 60 to the minute hand, like so, and then the elapsed time up to 1 hour can be read at a glance, exactly the same as using the bezel of a dive watch. So how do you use all this to determine your position on Earth? Honestly, I have no idea. To use it the way Lindbergh did also requires a sextant and a nautical almanac, two things I don't own and wouldn't know how to use anyway. Even the Longines manual sort of explains how to do the hour angle calculation, but more of a fun exercise than a practicality. That's all fine with me because I know that almost no one who bought this watch in the 1930s knew how to use it for navigation either. They bought it because it was well made, unique, interesting, and associated with adventure, the same reasons as today. At 47.5 millimeters, this is a big watch. My 7¼ inch wrist just barely supports it, so if you have small wrists, you should probably forget it. I generally don't like big watches, but purpose-built flight watches definitely get a pass. These watches had to be big to be read by moonlight in a shaky cockpit. If you like aviation or astronomy, this watch is definitely for you. Or, if you just want a watch that's truly unique and beautifully built, that very few people will own, this is a great choice for that too. These days, Lindbergh's airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, hangs in the U.S. National Air and Space Museum for all to see, and his personal hour angle watch is there too. Lindbergh's pre-war racist rantings and marital infidelity are quietly acknowledged but not discussed much these days, which I suppose is understandable, because this is the Lindbergh everyone wants to remember. Well, that's my review of the Lindbergh Hour Angle Watch. I hope you enjoyed it. There are many more videos to come, so if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.